Welcome everybody to our Talking Stick show. My name is Laura Massey from Two Feathers Medicine, and tonight I'm with my co-host brothers with Dale Tobin.
Hello guys, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Hello.
And Maty Waller.
Yes, again, good evening, good morning. Hello everybody.
We're delighted tonight that Jonathon Huet, who is one of the best Celtic shaman I know, is with us, has agreed to come along and tell us what he does as... He's also known as the Woodland Bard, I believe, Jonathon, aren't you? So welcome to Talking Stick Show, and you introduce yourself and tell us something about what you do.
Okay, thank you, Laura. I'm Jonathon. Yes, I do go under the name of the Woodland Bard. I very much... Do you want me to talk a bit about my own journey with that?
Yes, fabulous. Yeah,
so,
thank you.
If I go back quite a while to my childhood, I lived in Portsmouth, and I lived, in concrete flats. I lived right in the centre of Portsmouth, but I always had a love for nature and working with the land. And even then, I would have binoculars around, and I'd always be noting nature wherever I went. And then, about the age of 12, I moved to what would be called a suburb, which was Bedhampton. But to me, it was the middle of the countryside. And I think even then, there was such an excitement. Oh, there's a woodland on the way to school, and I instantly just felt that connection. I loved being in woods. The woodland probably had burnt out rubbish in it and magazines and so on, but that young people are like that, aren't they? Often they just, whatever you're experiencing is more important than what you're, you haven't got the judgment and so on. So I just loved being in the woods. And as I left school and left home, I just went more and more rural. Although now I do actually live in Brighton. And I think for me, my path has been about following my heart. And I love the word tradition. I know tradition can be a bit like the word God. It can have this loaded feel to it. But for me, tradition is just simply something that's there before me and something that will be there way after I've gone. So I always, what are my traditions? What are my traditions of the land? But very much following my heart with that. So I literally, when I was about 18, 19, I looked at the map in England, I'm in Britain, and I put a pin on it and I went to Wales, and I settled there. I think I had a month's money for rent or something, and I set up what became Walk with Trees, which was growing native plants and wildflowers. It was a very interesting time because I was refused any benefits at all, and being full of ideas. Looking back, I probably thought it was a bit naive, but it worked. I actually appealed against the fact that I wasn't entitled to money. I said you should be encouraging innovation and so on. And I actually got quite a lot of money back payment from them. And then it was a time when people were just ordering wildflowers. I don't really think I was very known. There wasn't Facebook or wasn't really the internet around then. So yeah, I would just get orders for flowers and plants and trees, and it just grew from there. And I literally ran the business from a push bike and trailer. So I feel really lucky that I was able to weave my own path and my own way of being with that. And eventually I ended up living in an ashram, spiritual community in Hampshire, but it was based on the Indian tradition, so Kashmir Shaivism. And this was quite an awakening for me because it introduced me to prayer and to ritual. And although I'd been to what we call pagan moots and working with Druidic groups and so on, it really had that devotional quality, which I fell in love with. And it's only sort of quite recently, really, the last 6-7 years, that I started working with Kathleen Matthews, who's got this wonderful way of working in a very devotional way within the Celtic path and connecting with my own ancestral lineage and my own tradition within me. And I think that's what I'm quite passionate about. The fact is, modern people didn't just appear out of holes one day. We have our own indigenous ancestral connection to the land and to nature. And I think it's really important to own that and to be a part of that, rather than thinking we're mimicking something that was once happening. You know, it's very real, and that reality comes from a practical application. So going onto the land, working with spirit, and seeing what happens from that. I think for me, it's being present. It's the most important thing. So it's stepping onto the land and being present with it. I could talk more about land connection, but I don't know if you wanted me to continue, or you had any questions.
Yeah, do. Yeah. Carry on. No, tell us about your land connection.
Okay, so I tend to like to mine one particular mythology. It's the way I have, and over the years I've worked with different mythologies, because I love story, and for me, story is prayer. Story is also a way of, it's guidance, it's inner guidance, it's instruction. So for me, I connect very much with the Irish mythology, and that's the mythology that I mine. That's the mythology which to me is my sacred text, is my sacred book. So I tend to work with that the most. And I find that working from one mythology means that I can keep digging a bigger and bigger hole, if you want, to reach that treasure. So when we look at these stories and we look at them in a prayerful and an instructive way, there's a great story which is part of the Yoa Gabala Iran, which is when the Gaels come to Ireland. And what's interesting, you have this character called Algin, Lunar Gale, Algin of the White Knee. And when he steps upon the land, he has, first of all, has identification with the land. So shall I say the words, the translation of the words that he says?
Yes,
So
lovely. Yeah.
for me, it's about doing it, really. As I think it's the same with you three too, but it's not about an intellectual understanding. It's about, well, let's see, let's experience that. So he steps on the land and he says these words. And as I say these words, maybe let us connect with those elements as he identifies with the land and the elements of the land. So he says, I am wind on sea. I am ocean wave. I am roar of sea. I am bull of seven fights. I am vulture on cliff. I am dewdrop. I am fairest of flowers. I am boar for boldest. I am salmon in pool. I am lake on plain. I am mountain in a man. I am a word of skill. I am a point of a weapon that poureth forth combat. I am a god who fashioned fire for a head. Who is it that announceth the ages of the moon? Who the place where falleth the sunset? Who calleth to the cattle of the house of Terrace? On whom do the cattle of Terrace smile? Enchantment about a spear, enchantment of wind. And then he steps upon the land and he has that identification with all those elements, with the wind, with the fairest flowers, with the boar. And then as he steps on the land, the next element of the story is he connects with what we call in the Celtic tradition, the sovereignty of the land. And that's often in the form of the female. Now, it's not really necessarily about male and female gender. For me, it's about the quality as well, the quality of the female. And in my work, I like to work directly with more goddess figures, because I think the female is very neglected certainly in Western society. So first of all, he comes to Banva, and Banva stands there, and she's older. She was older than the mountain, she's high up in the mountains at the time of the flood, older than Noah. There's often these biblical references in the Irish mythology because Christianity was coming into the stories and they canalized them. That's a whole nother element to look at. But she comes and her name means the woman of the cows. And we have this with Boan as well. She's connected to cows. So this is early society. This is where the cow was the currency. It was the milk. It was the fecundity of the land. And she says, well, if you're going to invade this land, I want my name to be upon it. And again, the name is important. And certainly when I lived in the ashram for a while, we would chant, and we wouldn't always know the meanings of the words, but they in Sanskrit and I'm sure there's elements of that in other languages, the name was the thing. And it's quite hard, I think, for the Western mindset to get their head around that. So when you say Banva, you're invoking Banva. It's not just, a word. So
we have a thing called light language that we use quite often in our discipline and throughout all the other, and so that concept is exactly the same thing. I think Sanskrit is actually a form of light language.
Okay,
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
Wonderful. And I personally feel it with the Gaelic as well, like Banva, Fola, Iru. There's a real energy about the deity.
Yeah, Gaelic as well is another one that is a light language, original Irish Gaelic, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So Banva is of the cows, so he is of this old tradition. And it's interesting because there's these references in these which they talk about. There's more to know about her in this book of Drum's Nectar. No one knows what this book is. So there's an older tradition happening. There's layers of tradition. And I think for me, this is what's important about connecting with the land, is it's not a fixed thing. I don't know about you guys, but I'm finding these days we want to label and analyze and be literal with so many things, even our spiritual paths. But it's not a fixed thing. The land responds to what you bring to it. There's a wonderful poet called Fiona MacLeod, and she said, everyone is welcome for what they bring. And it's, what are you bringing to the land? It doesn't matter. The land spirits don't mind. They're not worried about whether you're Christian or pagan or male or female or dark or fair or Latin or Teuton or Celtic. All it is about being present, I think, with the land.
And a lot of people have light workers. A lot of light workers go to different various lands and want to do clearings, and they always want to know about the land or know specific things which will give them that kind of nice fix. And we've kind of, it's so right, man. We've lost that way of feeling the land, going there, just enjoying the experience for what it is, not having to do anything to it, change it, but just be with it. And that I've gone through that process myself, where I've had to turn it around and be able to not go with expectation, but just to listen to nature and listen to what she has to say.
Be open to receive, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And Laura, Sorry, Laura, I was about to say, you and I experienced it. Remember, we went to the hill near my house with no particular intention, but we just went and we took some frankincense and went up to this hill, and it was so mystical because it's actually a beautiful thing to look at, but there was a mist that covered everything. And Laura couldn't see what she was doing, so she still to this day doesn't know what it looked like. But it was so mystical because all that water was around us as well, and it was just magical. And then we burnt this incense, and then we had the ancestors and that speak to us and present themselves, and But it is that it doesn't matter. You don't have to have a fashion. You just have a prayer in your mind and a deep connection to the land, and there's something to offer. It can be tobacco, it could be just the prayer itself, it could be a drum. It could be something like burying a gift or something, or crystal, anything. But it's that, it's just from you to the land, and then the gifts that come and the mystical experiences happen spontaneously. They come to you at the right time. It's not like you go there, right? Where's my mystical experience? Mm-hmm. It has to be done properly.
Yeah,
Definitely.
It's a co-creation, isn't it? It's a co-creation. Carry on, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I often feel the same. When you're stepping onto the land, you're obviously well-being, self-development, all those things are connected to it, but that's not what it's about. It's about connecting with the spirit of whatever's present there. And I'm sure you guys are already very aware of that. Sometimes that present might be angry, it might be deep sadness. In fact, when I was thinking about what I would be saying this evening, I was in the woods 2 days ago wondering about this evening what we'd do, and I was collecting kindling for the fire. And I suddenly saw a red cloak go past me, and because I was thinking a lot, I was talking a lot, and I thought, hold on, just be in the land. And I looked, and I got a real sense of the tree spirit there. And I sometimes, although it's lovely to work with the land, shamanically with the drum and the rattles and so on, sometimes, certainly in this part of the world, the Southeast, it's a very busy place. So sometimes it's easier to then take that back. So whether you take a stone back or just the impression back with you. And then I meditated with that at home. And I said to the spirits, so what does it feel like? How is it on the land at the moment? What is the experience of that? And I just felt this immense, it was like grief. it was horrific. It was really just this sadness of what is going on because people are not recognizing the land and the spirit of the land. And I said, so what can we do? How can we help? And the message I got was to witness the land, to see, to witness the spirits, to see the spirits, and to acknowledge them. So it's a real feeling of, they don't want me necessarily to go there and start sending them healing and love. They just want to be acknowledged and seen and being present with them. It's not indifferent to the work that I do, because I work with children, young people in the woods. And often those young people have quite a lot of trauma and difficulties. And when they enter into the wood, I could be the teacher if I want to say, right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But actually, you're just present to what's going on for them, and then hopefully things come out of it.
Gosh, they will teach you. They will teach you. Absolutely. You just watch and learn.
Same with young people and with wild animals. You approach the land, be present with it, and what comes from that. And I think our feeling of peace and well-being and all those things, that does happen, but that's not the function. You're there to connect. You're there to have a relationship. So for instance, if I said, oh, Laura, I'm going to come round because I want to feel good, I want to go to Laura because she'll make me feel good, that wouldn't be probably the nicest relationship.
Not very polite.
I'm using you.
So I think that was it. So when Algin stepped on the land, he connected with the three forms, so with Banva, with Fola, and then with Eru. And interestingly enough, there was a mist apparently that appeared at this time, and then the women would come through the mist. And there's one story where Eru has enlivened all the sods of the earth, and they think, oh dear, we're going to have to fight again. And they realized it was just the sods of the earth. And they made a promise to the sovereignty of the land to remember their names. So it's that remembering again. And then when they went into the center of the land where the kingship was, the king said, okay, you can have the land. So these are what we call the fairies today. But the Tuatha, the people of the gods, were giant type beings. They're often described as. So they're not fairies in this sense of little tiny beings with gossamer wings. They're strong, powerful beings. And this is where we get the stories of the hollow hills and them retreating into the hills. So the kings of the Tuatha said, yeah, okay, but you need to retreat back out and come back in again. So it was almost like they'd gone in the back way into the land, and now they were going to come back and see if they were accepted. So they went out beyond the ninth wave. And it said that Aurigin made that the ruling, the law of the time, that the land, the edge, the boundary of the land was beyond the ninth wave, so beyond the sea of the ninth wave. And then he came in again, and a storm brewed. So the Tuatha raised this storm. The spirits of the land and the sea, and the sky fought back. He came into the land, and then he invoked the three goddesses, the sovereignty of the land itself. In effect, he was communicating with the land for it to accept him, and that's when he landed in again. Would you like to hear that chant? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so for those listening and don't understand Celtic traditions at all, would you be able to just go over a bit about Celtic traditions and the backbone of it, just for those who are listening who've just tuned in and going, oh, I've never heard of this before?
What are we talking about here?
Yeah, what are we doing?
So for me personally, I work with the Irish tradition, but it very much connects. There's a lot of similarities when we work with the ancestors, so with the Iron Age ancestors and the way in which they sought and worked with things. So the most sacred vow is of the earth, sea and sky. So the earth, heaven is above us, the earth is beneath us, and the sea all around us. And this triplicity runs through all of the stories and the lore. So what I was just talking about, for those of you who have just joined us, is the three goddesses, Eru, Banva, Fola. So they're three goddesses, and they're representing the sovereignty of the land. And it's important we don't get too caught up with male and female. It's the female within us all, the sovereignty within us all. And it's the female that's been neglected. So I tend to bring that into focus. So in the stories, they often talk about the kings coming in. So there was Partholon came in, the Nemedians came in, but actually there's always the queens as well. And in this tradition, we recognize those two. So the Milesians, who are said to be the early Gaels of the people, had 7 queens. And again, it's the sounds of their names which is important, not just who they are. So Thea, Phil, Foss, Libon, Ova, Sculpture, and Skenya. So it's really bringing that in. And then we have Marcha, who is like, I call her the mother of races. So she is said to be the mother of a lot of the races of the early people. Because we often talk in traditions about, well, in the Christian tradition, the first man, Adam. In yogic tradition, they talk about the first yogi. And sometimes in shamanic traditions, they talk about the first shaman in this very male form. But then behind that, they've been nurtured and nourished by the earth itself. So in the Celtic tradition, the land's already there. This is where the cosmology starts. The land's already there, and it's our relationship to the land. I hope that makes sense. I'm very much in the story,
Beautiful.
so it
Yes,
may
beautiful.
Maybe more
Thank you.
complex than.
And if anybody does have any questions in the chat for Jonathan, just drop them in and we can ask him the questions as well.
So did you want to do a little with your drum and so on, Jonathan, to put this into the story that you were going to do?
Same. Yeah. I use story a lot. And for me, it's about you're in the story, and they're not just stories. And I think you mentioned it in the chat before we started about stepping out of time. The story's there, always happening. It's in the moment. There's a lovely expression, I can't remember who it's from. Kathleen Matthews, who has taught me a lot, quotes it, that mythology has never happened, but is happening all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's it, because you're stepping out of time with that. So it's very much about that. So I'm going to invoke the land. When I'm invoking the land of Ireland, of Eru, of Banva, of Fola, but when I do this is another important thing for me with the word tradition. It's not this fixed, rigid thing. It's welcoming and it's inclusive. So as we invoke that land, we're invoking all lands of all peoples. Should we do that? Should we invoke the land?
Lovely.
Okay. Eru Banvo Fola, I invoke the land of Erin. Eru Banvo Fola, I invoke the land of Erin. Fruitful be her seas, perpetually green her forest. I feel her in my bones, I feel her in my blood. I feel her in my bones, I feel her in my blood. So again, as I say, the different components, the meadows, the rivers, the streams, if you really try and connect with that as I speak them. I invoke the land of Erin. Surging is the mighty sea. Mighty is the upland full of meadows. Full of meadows is the rainy wood. Rainy is the river full of waterfalls. Full of waterfalls is the spreading lake. Spreading is the spring of multitudes. A multitudes of peoples is the assembly of the kings of Tara. Tara is a tower of tribes, the tribes of the sons of Mil. Warriors of ships, of vessels, Ireland is a mighty vessel. Flourishing is Eberdon, a very wise incantation of the very wise wives of Bress, outcry of the wives of Bunia. Ireland is a vast woman. Eramon smote her, ere Iber entreated her. I invoke the land of Erin. Blessed be. And so as he invokes the land to the three goddesses, the sovereignty of the land, the storm calms, and he comes in at Invocolpa, he comes into the land, he comes into the sacred site that we know of as Brunabonia. and the Milky Way, which is the Balak Nabothinya, which is the way of the white cow, and they step into Tara. And this is what's interesting. This is the first of the Gales coming into Ireland, and then the magical beings, the Tuatha, the people of the gods, or the Tuatha Danann, the people of Danu, they retreat into the hollow hills, and they're still there now. And that's where we tap into when we come into the land, these beings that are in the hollow hills, in the lakes, in the rivers, in the wild parts of the world. But what's a really interesting point, and this is a story in the text called The Hollow Hills. And the story starts, it says, there was a wondrous king over the Tuatha, and his name was Yoki Olaha. Another of his names was the Doida, for he used to make miracles and apportion storms and fruits. Great was his power, even over the sons of Mil. These are the sons of Mil that have just come in. Sons of Mil, even after they had seized the land. For the Tuatha blighted the grains and the milk until they made a pact with the Doida. Thereafter, they preserved the grain and milk for them. So this again is when we step on the land, when we make a connection with the land, there's already beings there. There's already the unseen there, but there's also obviously the seen world, which is what we start with. And there's also the unseen. So the fact that we think we can just step on the land and build a house or build a car park or just even be on the land, actually where we need to find out who's already there and what's happening already there. So
like Glastonbury,
that identification. Sorry,
it reminds me of Glastonbury, a land which didn't want what's on there now.
Yeah, we often joke about Glastonbury because it's considered the spiritual centre of the UK, but it's actually the most haunted place in the whole of the UK. It's a cesspool of haunting. It really is, the whole place. Everybody goes there and dumps their energy. All these people that are not doing the sacredity that you're talking about, but going there for self-gratification and some kind of, misguided drive to look spiritual.
Yes.
Or do spiritual things, and it's just, there's none of that sacredity behind it, and it just creates such a mess.
When I went to Dorset, I went to see the oldest living beings in Dorset, which are small leaf lime trees, and they're on the border of this lovely wood. I think it's called Duncliffe Woods. And from a botanist point of view, beautiful, just wonderful. But then when I tuned into the land, and this is the thing, because it's things come to you through your own cultural filters. So I can only tell you what my experience is. You may experience it differently. But with trees, for me, the spirit of a tree is very different from the spirit of a plant. And often it's either ancestral, there are human ancestors there, or there may be spirits there. When I connected with these trees, there was a real kind of old ancient woodsman ancestor there. And he was not happy, not happy at all. And it was that feeling. These beautiful trees were right up against this barbed wire fence, and the woodland was still lovely. I can't take that away. But there was this anger. And I find that time and time again that when I enter into a woodland, the trees, it's not always, as I said earlier, about love and light. The trees are strong and powerful, and they've got a voice to be heard. And they want to be heard and witnessed first. And then you do get, often I've found, you do get this sense of non-duality, and you do get these wonderful experiences too. But that only comes, I feel, from you being present with the land initially to hear what it has to say. And like you say, there's many stories where people do so many blessings and tie so many cloths on trees, the branch actually comes off because it's so heavy. Or it doesn't decompose because it's plastic.
There is a process of resolution in some of these. It's not always like it is in my experience that there are places where the land, it's calling a lot of those people in for a specific purpose. Places can get abused, but some of it is working in the right way.
I guess it's everybody's personal karmic journey as well, isn't it? Places maybe they need to go to get karmic resolution, or beings they need to interact with.
Sorry, Laura. I walked past a tree once that had been just cut down. It was on the riverwalk that I do quite a lot, and I spoke to the tree, and it was very rude. Really did like swear at me. And then I passed it some weeks later, and actually I think I took it some tobacco or something like that, and then it was in a better mood. It was starting to grow again, but it was really unhappy about just being cut off. Just this big, huge tree that reached across the river.
Have you ever known haunted places, Jonathan? Haunted as in tree haunted, so where you can have mass deforestation just done by machine, not done in any sort of sacred way at all, where you get just big swathes of trees cut down. You can actually get haunting from the trees because they've just been gone in such an untimely manner.
I mean, that is the norm now, really, the way in which
sadly
is done. It's not even chainsaws, it's just this huge machines which basically they cut it. I mean, it's beyond chainsaw. It's just a huge machine that takes it down. It's got a crane on it, and then it moves it and puts it through. And it's that devastation that's there. And I think this is part of that work, is when you work with the land, which I've done all of my life, both in a physical way, but also the spiritual element too. It's important to acknowledge that there are hauntings, there are that other side. I mean, a lot of the, there are so many stories about connecting to the. I tend to not use the word fairy because, again, it's a bit like God and tradition. It's kind of got all this, this sort of stuff around it. When I talk about fairies, I mean powerful beings, not twinkly little beings. When we talk about that fairy tradition, we're cautious. I personally, so far it's gone okay. I have a connection with that, and I feel if you're open to feeling that pain and open to what they have to say, it's perfectly safe and it's fine. I think if you're going in there and you're just traipsing through and damaging things, that's not good. And people will say, well, I go round, I cut a tree down, I did that, nothing happened to me. But again, it's this out of time. And when we look at what's happening at the moment, we're losing that connection with the earth, sea and sky. And as they say, there's a great, in one story, they talk, I started saying about it, heaven is above us, the earth is beneath us, and the sea is all around us. And then they say, and this was often, they say the only thing that the Celts were scared of, unless the sky shall fall with its showers of stars upon the ground where we are camped, or unless the waves of the blue ocean shall come over the living forests of the world, we shall not give ground. They're just about to battle. But the point there is that is what they were afeared of, that the earth, sea and sky. It wasn't the battle they were going for, because they knew that they had ancestors. And when you do ancestral work, you automatically connect with descendants as well. So they knew about eternal. It's very likely that they knew about eternal time and what was happening there. But it was the elements themselves, the earth, sea and sky. Of course, there's the fourth element of fire running through things as well, and the fifth element of spirit. But that sacred vow of the earth, sea and sky is paramount to connecting with those traditions. Yeah.
And doesn't metal play a significant role in the Celtic shamanism?
Yes, because I know that they recognise it very much in the Oriental tradition, don't they? They bring metal and wood and all those as elements in as well. Certainly, metal was very sacred and was seen as very sacred in the stories. And in fact, the swords, it says in the Battle of Maturif, they talk about the swords, that if you pick a sword up, it holds the memory of the last person that it killed. And that's how, so I think it was Ogma picked up a sword, and that's how they discovered where the Doridus harp. The Doridus harp's no ordinary harp. It plays the seasons into being, Dada blow. So it's a very important harp. And this harp is found through the voice of the sword. I can't remember the exact character now who held it, but so metal and steel are very important. Of course, coming to that is it comes from the earth, and this is the other element of things such as mining. For instance, uranium and so on is being mined in places where they don't even believe in digging the soil and farming. So this is another important element that we have to think of. Have we got the right to take the iron and the uranium and even sticking away from the pollution elements? Do we have permission for that? What role do those metals and minerals play in the earth? You know, what are we disturbing down there? Whether it's from a spiritual perspective or even from a physical perspective, it's all one anyway, isn't it, ultimately? But do we have the rights to dig up these metals? And at one time, I mean, obviously metalwork started very early on. They would have, like in the Irish tradition, it's Givney the smith. And Givney the smith, you would respect him and honor him, and then take your metals up. And because Givney's a great character, because the Givney's feast means that you never get old and you never decay. So you want to stay in with him, you know. So metal was very sacred, as was farming. The farming was very different. It's the Celtic tradition is quite interesting because they connect with farm animals, whereas in often shamanic traditions, it's the wild animals that you connect with. But the probably farming then, the animals were much closer to their original wildness, if you want. You know, like the early cows would have been aurochs, and you know, the boars would have been the wild boars. So they probably had a wilder element, but they actually connected with the sacred animals that were farmed as well. So
they were animal husbandry shamans, and
yes.
So they would travel around the whole world and depart knowledge and whatnot, and it's animal husbandry on a much mass scale, but with a deep spiritual element to it for seeding new species and things. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So and again we have this tradition of this transforming into animals. There's a wonderful story, or two stories actually. So that the oldest, when the Milicians arrive and they talk to Banvo and Fola and Iru, there's someone there called Fintan Mac Pukra, and he says, "Island, whatever is asked of me, I know precisely every taking that took her since the beginning of the tuneful world. I am Fintan the White, I shall not conceal it. Ever since the flood, I'm a great and noble sage." And the way he survives is by becoming an animal. And we have becoming animals, actually. And we have this with Tuan Macarroll as well, who takes the forms of all these different animals. So we have a tradition of the oldest animals, and this is how they discover the stories and learn the secrets of the land, by becoming animals, which you'll all probably be familiar with the shamanic work that you do and with other traditions across the world. So the oldest animal is the salmon, which makes sense because it comes out from the sea. So they go back to these pools, like the pool of Connla, the salmon of Feck, and they connect with the salmon, which eats the hazelnuts, which is the knowledge of life. And by becoming animals, we can go back to the memories of that land and become a part of that land. So it's really quite fascinating. Tuan Macarroll goes into a cave and he becomes a deer, then he becomes a boar, then he becomes an eagle, and then he becomes a salmon, and then he's reborn as a person. But the process, they call it a tursion, which is it's like the transmigration of life. So it's like his life, he didn't die and come back again, he just kept going and going and going.
Like
so
a shape-shifting.
Yes, a shape-shifting.
Yes, shape-shifting.
And that's how they witness the stories, which is great. So what was happening, particularly between the 5th and the 7th centuries, is they were saying, right, we've got an oral tradition, but we don't want it to get forgotten. So we're going to canalize it. I mean, I find it fascinating what was going on with Christianity. It's very easy to kind of black and white things and Christian behavior. But, you know, there was this movement that was going through the ancient world of this rising of this Christ energy and what was going on with that. And what the Irish people did is they said, well, we don't want our land tradition to be forgotten. So they integrated the two. And what happened there was some saint will turn up and be told the story by an ancient ancestor. And then these saints, you know, they were meant to be kind of Christian saints, but they were there at graveyards raising up the ghost of the past to tell them a story. And this was accepted by the Pope of the time. You know, it's just fascinating tradition where we see it coming through all the different ages. And I think this is the other thing. It's still the same story, but we can come in at it a different spiral. So that story, I may come in as a shaman with my cave paintings, banging my drum, wearing my bones. I may approach it from that, or I may come in as a Christian monk in my hermitage. And some of the early Christianity, the animals come and help them in their hermitages. You know, they have that connection still with the animals and with the sacredness of the land. I may come in as an Iron Age Celt, you know, with the sacredness of the farming and the seasons. or it may come in as a modern storyteller, looking at the archetypes and the psychology and the neuroscience and all that type of stuff. But it's still the same land, it's still the same story. And that's why there's so much, I feel, and it's happening more now, although we're more accepting in society, there's so much dualism going on. You should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, what's going on here. And we've chucked fundamental Christianity out of the box, but we've replaced it with fundamental everything else. I feel at times people are telling you what you should believe and what you should be doing. Oh, well, in 1938, they said that fairies did this, so you must be wrong. And that's where the practical application comes in, because if you're doing it and experiencing it, good example is that, as I heard someone say, I used the word 1938 because someone wrote something saying that that's when the thinning of the veil, this idea that there is a thinning of the veil at Samhain and Bealtaine was written down in 1938. But it's not that sort of research we want. You want to connect with someone who's experiencing that thinning of the veil, who's seeing those beings and being a part of that and working with it. This is why I love working with my teacher, going to trainings with Kathleen Massey, because she has this tremendous body of law and knowledge, but then she's applying it practically and teaching us how to do that as well. And as you guys probably know, there's a definite methodology, when we see these kind of shamans and so on telly or whatever, shaking their rattles and so on. It's such an intricate, complicated system of working with the animals and the plants, and as we've talked about, removing entities and obstacles and working with ancestors. It's actually a very complex, intricate system that needs to be taught and applied. It's not just people going off on one.
No, absolutely. And it's not just the reading about it, as you're saying. It's not just saying, oh, I know that. It's I think, as Andrew said, action turns knowledge into wisdom. So you can have all this knowledge, but until you've actually done the experience of it and the connection that you're talking about, then it's coded as wisdom within you. And that's the real growth that I had to learn, particularly on my journey. I'm sure these guys have as well here. And we're not teaching shaman, we're practicing shaman. Because we're also learning all the time. I mean, you don't have to be called shaman. You could just say, we work with the natural energies of Earth. Exactly. I mean, couldn't you, Maty? You could, come up with any number of sort of names for it, I suppose, or experiences that we go through. We like to co-create with the good, true and beautiful ancestors of the unseen world. And so on. Very much, what you're saying.
Through these practices, it just expands your awareness and of what's going on. And in order to have more awareness, you have to be more responsible, and you have to make corrections in your own life and be responsible as a human being for every aspect of your life. And then you get, you access these different layers of the weave and of history, and the fact that time isn't linear. And all of these traditions, like, I wasn't going to say, I don't want to talk about it too much, but as you were speaking there, the words that you were using were light language, and there were some trigger words. And so for the skills that I've got, those words triggered me into a forgotten time, and as you were speaking I was able to see all of what you was talking about, and I have a different perspective on it, but I'm not going to talk about it here, because we'll do that another time maybe, or we'll talk about it privately. But it was really interesting. So that there was ancient use of certain knowledge when those stories were created that's been passed down to some like us who are just very contemporary but have achieved those same levels of awareness even now in this world and the way it is. There's and we all have quite different lives, but we're bonded by the fact that we've come to this, this state of awareness that we all share.
Absolutely.
And I think when we look at our ancestors, story was so real, and this is where I think again Western minds struggle, because it's completely real, but it's not literal. So the story details change, but it's still just as real. So it's kind of this kind of practicing people, and then there's people that are very literal with these things. So for instance, in the mythology, someone's died who hasn't even been born, and there's someone who's born who hasn't died, and all this is going on. But obviously we're stepping out of time, and the stories, you know, they're there, they're holding us because they're maps of the other world, they're maps of the inner world, and they inform us of that world. And I think it's, as you were saying, Matt, it's so good to step into that and actually be in that story, be in those ancient times or modern times. A brilliant line was in the story of Tuan Macarel. So Saint Finian of Moville communicates with Tuan Macarel. And Tuan Macarel actually comes to him as a venerable cleric. So he comes to him in a form that he can understand and know. And he says to his followers that they'll come to you in the morning, a good man, a man who will comfort you, and he will tell you the stories of Ireland since the first time it was colonized until today. And I love that line, until today. So these ancient stories are so relevant today. And when we've gone through wars and recently the pandemic and so on, you're reading the story and thinking, my goodness, they're talking about what's happening now. And it's really interesting, that spiral. A really interesting character is the Morgina. And again, there's the triple aspect now on Balfmacher. There's three of her and there's one of her. And she's great, actually. She's sometimes portrayed as this huge giant. And the Doida, or some people would say the Dagda, they come together. So he's like this being of the land. She's the being of the land too. And she really, you know, she's a powerful. She'll go across the sky and she'll use fire and blood, and she's really menacing. But also, this is where we're very black and white with things. So she's this real strong, barbaric character, but it's her that calls to the highest peace. She says, peace high as heaven, heaven down to earth, earth under heaven, strength in everyone. And then she asks for peace for the land and for its people. But she also does a prophecy, and she says, I shall not see a world that is dear to me. Woods without mast, sea without produce. And she goes through all these things. I don't know if this is a bit controversial, but it makes me laugh because she says, old men making wrong judgments. It was very poignant for now. Not that I'm going to specify any old men, but yeah, so it's they're alive and they're working within us. And I think it's really important to own that and be a part of it. And I think that's the other thing about tradition. In my early time, when I was moving through, I remember this, I can't remember where in Africa he came from, but he learned to play the djembe drum, so the big barrel drums that they play in Africa, in the villages. To him, it was his spiritual path. It was everything to him. And he was quite a scary chap. He wore bones actually through his hair, and he was really protective and powerful. But when he met me, he couldn't do more than enough. He was very happy to share his tradition. He was very inclusive. He was very welcoming. Now, if someone was to come over and try and, you know, culturally appropriate that tradition, he'd be on them in a minute. But the fact is, he was seeing me for who I was rather than from what race or culture I came from. And I think this is what's really important. We're kind of not always being present with each other as to where we're at. And that overrides sometimes what seems the rational, logical, intellectual viewpoint, because it's the feel of the person. And the same with entering the land, it's the feel of the land and how that is. And I think that's really important.
And I think also just from what Maty was saying about a lot of the names you're bringing forward in these stories, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners too will resonate with this. The words and the way you're using the words sets off a sort of resonance within us, which I think is us connecting to our DNA memories of knowing these stories and being there. And that's, as Maty was saying just now, which is why quite often, you know, we get body responses related to this, don't we? Because that's, you know, where our memories are in that DNA, in our bodies, you know, like crying or so on. You know, you get tears, you can get a lot of emotion. And that's why I think the stories are so good as well, because they're a brilliant way, as you were saying, of carrying on this tradition. But this has been lost with the generations now, hasn't it? Sadly, and that's something that I know you have children, don't you, at your retreats and so on, and at Butser, you work at Butser, don't you, at the what's it called at the farm?
The ancient farm.
The ancient farm, yes.
Sustainability Centre. The work I do with young people, I mean, I'm using that the spiritual element all the time, because I'm communicating with the spirit of the land. I'm communicating with other things that are going on, but they don't necessarily know that.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm just holding that space for them and allowing them hopefully to be themselves. And of course, sometimes I get it wrong, sometimes I get it right, and I just work with that. But I think what's happening today, and this is very sad, is and I think the young people now are really trying to get out there, and they need those role models, that they haven't got that foundation. So if there's a disaster, if something happens, they haven't got that community or that spiritual path to fall back on. And this is why we're getting such an increase with so many different conditions and extreme anxiety. I mean, I was one of those kids that had extreme anxiety. That's why I entered onto a spiritual path. But I think that has become the pandemic now, mental health. Because what you do when the
victim mentality as well, a massive fashionable victim mentality.
Yes, that's
an addiction to technology.
No, that's a very good point. I think there is that victim mentality of wanting to blame rather than take responsibility, because obviously there are ancestral reasons, there are historic reasons, but ultimately we do have the power to change that. And I came from an upbringing completely divorced from all of this, in a concrete mecca and so on, and we can choose where our path goes. But I think it's that holding that's important, the people finding that again, because I think what's happened is we've discovered that religion has been misused, as lots of things are misused. But replacing it with materialism is even more misused. And we don't believe that God's going to punish us, but we believe we have to have the God of technology, or the God of addiction, or the God of whatever going on instead. So it's just finding that still point. And that still point is so important, that lack of stimulus, that downtime, that silence, and I think that it's actually quite interesting, because I have groups sometimes which are very hyperactive or very wired, and they're kind of all geared up. And then there's moments where they just settle, because nature's this perfect mirror that's not judging anyone. So, you can have a child that's very violent or really struggling, they've got a lot of trauma, and the robin sits there, greets them the same as it greets everyone else. The tree witnesses them still, and so on. And you have these moments where these young people that have got a concentration span of 1 minute, and then suddenly they're quiet and they're just still. And then the teachers and so on are so thrown by it, they start getting active and reaching for their phone or whatever it is. So it's really important. But I think what's also important is that autonomy, is it's on their terms. So actually, I'm not going to make a fire or use the axe, which is often the kind of popular activities. They just naturally themselves reach for the binoculars and watch the birds or explore the insects and the wildlife. But the
best thing you could do for them is to get their bare feet on the ground as well.
Yes.
While that's all going on, as long as bare feet on the ground, just get them grounded in, earthed in. I mean, if these kind of children, if they got that experience once a day at least, their lives would be completely different within a year.
I think you're right. I think we can't underestimate that connection to nature. But it is getting forgotten more and more, and the more we're on these screens now, they're really useful. Technology is a very useful thing, but it's also having that time away from that and being in nature.
I had a over the last weekend I had a experience on Aya. I won't say the name because don't know if you're allowed to say it on YouTube, but I had an experience where I went and did the grandmother medicine, and I saw my grandmother, saw my ancestors, and they were showing me each and every child I have, and they were showing me the phones, and it was basically they were showing me what's been forgotten and what's been remembered. So they were cornering off all the forgotten of what the children were going through, like the phones, the tablets, and they were saying this is why we've been forgotten for so long, and that the stories of the ancestors, the songs of the ancestors have to be sung again from oral teachers so they can be remembered. And your stories as well, connecting to the past, that they're oral teaching stories, how stories should be, instead of stories coming in from YouTube or someone who grows up in a concrete jungle who all they see is not nature, all they see is stories on YouTube shorts and stuff like that. Forgotten, they have been forgotten, and it's about how can we remember them, and doing storytelling is one of the most important things, I feel. I did over the last few days, I'm doing more stories with the kids, and they absolutely love it. Like, there's something about telling them a story. They engage and they're like, holy shit. Like, but you're putting a teaching in there and you're making it fun, you're making it happy for them, instead of being like, right, I'm going to throw information at you now, listen to this. And they're like, fuck off. I'm going to say it in such a story, and you're going to be in like awe about it, and it's going to imprint you into the real truth of remembering.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Like in the school curriculum, you're learning a set of facts, tell me 10 facts about 1066, whereas actually if you went into the story of 1066, if you became the warriors or you became the people working the land, or even the cook, you actually entered it into story and experienced it, you would just know. And like Laura said, you'd feel it in your DNA as well. You may have been there, probably were. So it's that feeling, and that's what I think's nice about stories, because it has a neutrality, or even though it may have elements which aren't neutral at all, there's still a neutrality about it, because it's a story and it's the way it's presented and it's the feel of it and the way in which it comes about. I think it's really important, and the spirit of the story wants to be inhabited, and that's the same thing, coming back to the theme, connecting with the traditions of the land. They want to be witnessed, but they also want to be embodied and inhabited. We had all these rituals. I recently went to a huge ritual, Butser Ancient Farm, where there's a burning wicker man, 40 foot high, and there's me there doing kind of Celtic reenactment, and there's Saxons and the storytelling, and there's all these things. And obviously some of it is for some people it's a spectator sport, and there's no doubt about that. For other people, it's deeply spiritual. But when people dress up as animals, for instance, in some of these parades, or Jack in the Green, or whatever it is, they're also putting on the garments of those deities. They're becoming those deities, and those deities want to be embodied again. When I was in the ashram, the first thing I had to do was dress the deity, offer it food, wash it down. And as far as the tradition was concerned, and I was concerned actually, it was completely alive. There was no, that's just a metal statue. It was enlivened by the Brahmin priests. And I actually had a very peak experience with that, when the statue just looked at me and I felt this light go into my body. And as Laura was saying, I had a very emotional response to that. It's interesting, because when Merlin in the Tower of Vortigern talks, he's asked to give a prophecy. The first thing that happens is he has an emotional response. He cries, and then he gives the prophecy. So it's that emotional response, and it's feeling, again, where we don't want to cut ourselves off from that. We want to feel. And sometimes anxiety and panic attacks and so on are induced because we're not feeling. Yes. So when the feelings come, it's like, whoa, what's going on? Stop. But actually, we want to be feeling people. And it's hard. I'm a very feeling person, very emotional person. And sometimes I feel so exposed. And obviously, what's helped me a lot with the shamanic training is having support with that. For instance, the power animal and ancestral help and so on. And there is that protective element. But also, I don't want to stop feeling. I want to feel exposed and vulnerable at time. I think it's important. Yeah.
In our tradition, women have the access to the infinite in their womb area. Okay. Men don't have that, so they have to go to the trees. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, the trees are remarkable things. Yeah, that's wonderful.
There's a wonderful teaching from Andrew called The Grove of the Matriarchs and The Grove of the Patriarchs. And these are, it's two groves that are floating on a lake in a big place, that are connected to source, where all the grandmother, grandfather trees live. So you've got the matriarch trees and the patriarch trees. And that's a fundamental part of his teachings, right through up into the higher level teachings, the mentorship teachings, that you go to this place where these sacred trees live. And he teaches that all trees really are connected as well, and not just on this world, but on all worlds. All trees are connected, and they are rare as well within our galaxy.
Wonderful.
Yeah, big teacher spirits.
Sought after.
They are very very expensive on a galactic scale.
Good shit.
Yeah, lovely way of putting it. I remember when I started as a forestry contractor, and I had a motorbike, and I would ride across an area called the Meon Valley, and I would look at all the fields, and I almost could see the forests that were once there. And there was this feeling that I wanted to call out, so the forest would just appear again, just like that. And I'll never forget that sensation and feeling, because obviously so many have been cut, because it's our natural biome here. We were forest, and apart from in higher lands and so on, and near the sea. But the forests, they're such important things. Wonderful.
But you can step into dream time too, or into that no time field, and recapture that. And I think that's the beauty of stories as well, because you get the inner visuals which take you on a journey. Whether you're reading a story, but sometimes, just to have somebody reading or telling you a story, like Dale was saying with his kids, is lovely, because our imagination gets taken away with all the instant gratification of the TV, especially in children, doesn't it? So, and with adults, of course. So we get it straight there on the telly, which dumbs down all that lovely inner wisdom turned into inner vision that we have, and all those inner memories that we hold. And I always thought it was amazing when I was a child, and of course I can do it now, but I lost that for a while, was that I could go anywhere within. I could journey anywhere, so I could journey back to those old forests like you're talking about. And I know the Meon Valley because a lot of my DNA ancestors are from that area. So it's stunning. And yes, I think I could. You can take yourself there at any time, can't you? That's the wonder and the amazement of this DNA skin suit that we have, is our technology can take us somewhere that we haven't physically been in this lifetime. And it's all available to us. And that's what I think, we need to be teaching the children now, that they can do that, which is why this storytelling, and like you're the Woodland Bard, is so vital in society today, to have that.
Absolutely. Kathleen Matthews often says imagination is the faculty of the soul. It's such an important element to just enter into that soul awareness through the imagination. It's really vital. And although living in the southeast, obviously it's often associated with, it's near London, we have a lot of roads, it can be a very busy place, but there's so much going on. The amount of people I know that live in the woods, that work the woodlands, that do the old crafts and old skills, there's still an element of that there, even if it's only in a certain sort of, with a certain repertoire of people. But those old traditions are still there, and people are still doing these things, and we can connect with that.
And I think on one level that's coming back a little bit too, because we've come through the hippiness of the 60s and 70s, which got a bit derailed, didn't it? And they got a bit sidetracked into whatever it was then, flower power and all the rest of it. And, we've come into, I don't want to say serious shamanism, because it's not serious, because it should be done in joy, and it should be done with a light-heartedness in a way, shouldn't it? It's not a heaviness. But we've come, hopefully, away from a lot of that that hippiness, I suppose, and we now actually apply a sacredness to it, which was always there. It's nothing new, is it? We have but it's the reteaching of these. It seems to be the shaman of old seem to be coming forward now at what we call the time of the Great Awakening and Great Remembering, or Andrew does. So it's there. I think, the fact that 4 of us are on here now, and and we connect like you do with many other people doing this great work, which I suppose is a real bonus of the technology. It works both ways, doesn't it, as you were saying?
Exactly. And you know what, like, I practice all kinds of shamanry. I live a multi-dimensional life. I do all kinds of magical processes, and I live just in a normal house on a street with the biggest busy road next to me, shops all around the place. There's, I'm just literally in the middle of it, but my sacred space is my sacred space, and the amount of great work that's been done on there, the amount of fires and amount of alcohol that's buried in the land that's been brewed and prayed over for many, many hours, and the relationship with just the trees that are around me and the animals that come and go, and it's its own sacred bubble. And it becomes that over the years of imprintation of your own sacred journey, and the land gets something from it and it gives you it back. It protects you.
And that is real, where we're born or the place that we end up in is the place where we're needed. If we all go off into rural expanses or go off to indigenous tribes in other parts of the world, the work is where we are and where we're here. And that's no less real than anything else or doing anything else. I love the idea.
We need those masters in the cities. We need the masters because a lot of people go and run away and they go into nowhere and they don't have any friends. they become on their own. They become very hermit, and that's great. I'm not judging you live that life, but we need the people to step up in communities, in places of loads of housing and areas that's where the work needs to be done, because there's more people there.
So and it can be done just by. Sorry, Dale. It can be done just by individuals as well. It's great to get together in groups, but just one person and finding a way to have sacred ceremonies, sacred fires, make offerings to the land, do all their prayers and their great work there, it has a massive effect. It has a massive effect, and it just takes enough people all around the world to do that, for the land to, come back into unity with the people. That it is in a way anyway, but we need to reconnect to it, I think would be the best way to say. She's holding space for us.
And I think it's not underestimating or devaluing that. That is such, you can go out and plant trees, you can do sustainable projects and all the rest of it. But this spiritual work, there's not that many people doing it really in the West. And it's such an important place to hold that sacred space, and making those offerings, as as much as anyone, Maty, the spirits are receiving that, the land is receiving that, and going beneath the concrete. Like we're talking about our DNA, the DNA of the land going deeper and deeper until eventually you end up back in that primal land, back in that forest. People say, well, how do you know that the ancestors believe that or they worked in that way? But the fact is, we're responding to fire and emotion and spirit the same way now as what we've always done. This is the reality. This is the practical application of it. And when people
when I work with my ancestors, they're always wherever I am. My ancestors are wherever I am at any given moment. Exactly. And then as I go along my journey, that ancestral connection grows and there's more added to it and more added to it. And so when I go to places, it's not just me that's there, it's this whole ancestry that's then through intention and some sacred practice. It's not always necessary to bang a drum or anything. It could just be a really heartfelt prayer or a moment,
Exactly.
There's so much going on. The unseen part of it is just so huge. It's a beautiful experience though, that ancestral connection. I find that as well when I work with other people, and when there's an experience between us that creates a healing amongst whoever, there's always then an ancestral gift back. There's always a healing that comes back to you, and it's the same for the nature connection. The ancestors on the lands where you live, they are there. They're just on another dimensional plane.
Absolutely.
And they're there, and your offerings and your prayers and the things that you do will affect them, and they'll come and this is how you wherever you are.
Yeah, and even these shows I got shown, the Talking Stick show and working with Andrew, how much karma and how much the ancestors love this show, because we're all coming together, soul families from different soul families, and we're all resolving karma together, where we're showing the peacekeeper and peacemaker, where we're all talking about love, we're talking about the message, and what we're doing for the ancestors just in this show is beyond words.
I think there was a couple of questions there.
Yes.
A few questions.
Get to those.
Scott. So the Aldeburgh Retreat, the famous story in this country actually is the Rollright Stones. And it's said that was a Danish army that invaded, and there was a witch that turned them into stones, a wise one that is, turned them into stones. And when they say England's invaded, there's a lot of stories like this, the stones will come alive and they'll fight for us. And it's said that witch then became an elder tree. And there's a story about someone hacking the branch of the elder tree off, and then they found an old wizened woman with an injured arm. So there is a lot of stories about that, and I do think that there's a really key link with ancestors and trees. I've certainly experienced that, where sometimes people go into the tree and become part of that. That for me is very real. It's not just a story. Favorite time to go into the wood? I'm a morning person. I mean, obviously dawn or dusk is great. I love the dawn, and certainly when you sleep in the woods and suddenly the birds start to sing. I mean, it's glorious. It's such a lovely show that they, such a lovely sound that you're hearing. So definitely, and those betwixt times are important, and it is that shimmering. And I think it's lovely to go at those times, but you can go in the middle of the day as well and still experience that magic on the land at any time.
But are there certain times, particularly in Celtic shamanism, I think they talk about there being areas or times or situations where, let's say, the veil is thinner, or it might be easier to connect to the unseen, like I think they say, isn't it, where the sea meets the land, on these sort of boundary places, or like in mist or fog.
So exactly, so it's this betwixt again, so the meeting of the world. So in Irish law there's something called the Fifiire, and basically what happened was, we talked about the Milesians, it seems a long time ago now, and they came onto the land, and then a mist. But what happened when they retreated into the Hollow Hills, Ma'anin, the sea god, actually, he came up and he created this mist, created a cordon between this world and that world. And often when it's described, they say, well, where is Tín na Óg, which is the land of youth, or Tír Fón Hon. There's lots of different names for these other worlds, and they say it's here. It's just there. And it's just lifting that mist, or penetrating that mist. So this is very much, because it's betwixt, it's kind of in the place that's already there. It's those places which are betwixt, so where sea meets land. Another thing is where there are two trees and there's a natural doorway. I don't know, probably people here have done that, but if you can go through two trees and just feel that doorway, and wow, I've gone into another world. And if you can get out of this, the other thing is when people look at something, you kind of, that's a telly, that's that. Or if we're in nature, that's a tree, that's a blackbird, that's a robin. We can soften our eyes and just start to see the shimmering between all that. And that's when you start to see the unseen, and it all starts to come alive. And that can be done at any time of the day. But the key time in Celtic law seems to be twilight. And also at key times in the season, particularly Bealtaine, which is the beginning of what they would call the beginning of summer, and Samhain, which is the end of summer, so the beginning of winter. So these betwixt times when they say that the she rides out, the lords of the air, the beautiful sons of the goddess, and driving the tempest tonight, pitiless stinging rain and the line. We have the seven sons of Eflu, Doida, Diankit, Krejna, Lutzna, Noadu, and Givni, and they're riding out on their horses or flying across the sky and all these things. So they're the earth angels. People talk about angels, but they're the earth angels. They're there helping us, lifting us up. If we can connect with them. If we're not connecting with them, they can be terrifying. Or if there are parts of ourselves which we're terrified of, they'll reflect that. So it's going back to a phrase I used much earlier on. Fiona MacLeod says, I can't, it's gone now. Welcome, all are welcome for what they bring. So it's what you bring. If you bring the terror and the darkness at Samhain and all that, that's what you're bringing. But if you bring that neutrality and that openness and that relationship, you'll bring that to it as well. And I think it's really important.
I think it's interesting what you're saying, that betwixt word, because also, for us, that connection has to be done in sacred neutrality. We called it sacred neutrality, which you probably do as well. So, because unless you're in that mode, unless you're coming in what Andrew will call non-competition, equal co-creation, non-hierarchal order, you're not going to be able to connect anyway. You've got to come in that sacred neutrality, heart-spaced awareness, which is what you're talking about. And I was thinking of that related to the areas of the betwixt, because that's what sacred neutrality is, that middle path.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, it's really, really, really important, and this stuff is there, and it's real, and it's important, and it's wonderful to connect with that.
It wants to be known, doesn't it? It wants to be known.
People that are listening, I run a regular group fortnightly called the Woodland Bard. It's kind of almost fortnightly. Sometimes it's not. It depends on what I'm doing. And we do that. We enter into story, and then I do some journeying and some meditation to connect with different themes. It's often around a tree, but we also look at those key themes of the earth, sea, and sky, of the goddesses, of the sovereignty of the land, of all these things of building our relationship with trees. So when I talk about tree law, this is another thing which I think is important. We're very, today we want to intellectualize, write out lists, put things into sections and so on. But tree law is about that sacred neutrality. When you meet your birch tree, you know, if you go up to that tree and say, oh, well, that's the tree of new beginnings, that's the tree of new beginnings. What you're actually, you're labeling it and you're putting it into something rather than actually just being present with what it is, because it may be something completely different to you to what's written in your tree book. You know, it might be something completely different, and you need to connect with that. Story is a good way to do that as well.
Yeah, I think that stories are absolutely the most fabulous way to bring something like that alive, isn't it? Oh, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so tell people where they can find you and what you do, really, what you've got coming up, what events are happening for you.
Okay, so yeah, my website is Walk with Trees. I've got a few retreats coming up. I've got a May one coming up in the woodlands. The retreats are great because they're a space where we can come for the weekend and really be in nature and really do the work. Because for me, tradition is in the doing, not in the reading or the intellectualizing of it. So it's great to come. We do fire ceremonies and we really get in there and look at that work. The way I hold space is in quite a gentle way. So I feel that's important, to allow things to come up and move. So it's a nurturing, gentle space. I run my groups on a spiral, so there's no beginners, advanced. It's just people can come in at any time and join those retreats. So I've got another one coming up in July. That's completely camping in the woods, but I also do residential ones because that's not possible for some people. And my next one of those is in September. These are all in the south.
I'm coming.
Yes, Laura's booked on it.
Yes, I have. Yes.
And that's a bit of comfort. You know, you can still sleep in the residential. You know, there's comfy beds and so on, but you're on a 55-acre site with meadows and trees and woodlands. Sustainability centre where I actually do a lot of work. And then I have my regular online group, which I've just spoken about, the Woodland Bard sessions where we explore a tree. And that's what's quite interesting about this, because I've spoken to so many people that offer therapies and so on, and meditation groups, and it works. You know, maybe this is a bit like the mycorrhizal fungi or the way in which spiritual beings work to contact us, but this actually works. And the spiritual beings and the meditation, so on, they seem to be fine with it. I don't get, you know, it just seems to happen. So the magic does happen, but at the same time, I think it's really lovely to be on the land and meet in person as well. So there's those elements. I've also got quite a few online courses, tree folklore, botany, connected with plants and so on. So yeah, do come and check. Anyone can email me through the website anytime, and I'm happy to answer questions and so on. Yeah. Thanks
so much. That's brilliant. That just actually gave me an idea. I'd not thought of that before. I suppose I do you two guys, you bring in the energy of maybe a totem animal or something when you're doing some healings, or doing some treatments. But I don't think I've ever brought in a tree. And you couldn't you?
I've brought in a tree to a client before.
Have you?
Like put them in the tree, to give them the earth element.
Wow.
Yeah, and I use now the tree of life imagery in most of my healings as well. So the tree's fundamental.
Yes, I have. I've taken
source
Peter.
connection and dream world connection.
Trees, I think,
Maty.
can be a very
Yes.
safe place for someone to enter, can't they, to be nurtured.
Because they're
I
nurturing.
suppose healing-wise, it's very much the plants I tend to work more with for kind of more direct healing, if you want, of things that are going on. But yeah, the trees and the plants and the animals, it's wonderful to work with those beings. Yeah.
I do trees in past life as well. The past life scripts I create for training is usually revolved around a tree with a doorway inside with your face engraved. So as you're going to the doorway, you see your face and you touch it, and as you open the tree, then you go down the spiral. Yeah,
That's
really
lovely.
cool.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
And we all are trees. We all have lives as trees. All of us. We've been through the whole grand experience of life that Earth has to offer. So we've all been trees. So they are our ancestors directly.
Yes.
Who we were in former lives, and then who we were related to in those lives. It's all interconnected.
It's almost like we have the trees, we have the humans and the spiritual beings, then we have the plants, and then we have the insects, and it's like it's all working together as allies and friends. It's
all our relations.
Yeah,
exactly.
all our relations, like reflected away.
Yeah.
And I like that someone saying about the tree, about a stick from a tree, and I think that's another thing about sacred allies, really. So my walking stick, as far as I'm concerned, is a living, breathing thing that I connect with, and it's one of my friends. It's one of my allies. We're talking about the animals, the plants, but also it's stones, rocks. Yes, I was going to say rocks, minerals, and those sticks, and they're fully there. They're part of. It feels like my companion. Well, it is my companion.
They are. Yes, absolutely, aren't they? Yeah.
All our relations. Yeah.
Beautiful. Is there anything else, guys?
I have my stick as well.
Oh, look.
It's my baby.
Oh, wow.
Nice shiny
beauty.
stick, Maty.
Yeah.
It's wood, is it? I can't.
Yeah, it's oak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it looks so dark from here. You
It
can't.
does, yeah. I had it oiled it up yesterday. But again, I've given this life force through my intentions as well. It's a very sacred object to me.
Absolutely. And we feed that. Our spirit is in it and it's in us, and we feed that. These sacred objects are so important. And I also feel that they take our senses out further. So, if I'm connecting with the land and with what's there, your stick's there, and it kind of almost, what's the word?
Amplifies?
It almost magnifies. Yes.
Yeah.
Magnifies.
Absolutely. Yes.
Just like Gandalf.
Wow. Yes, absolutely.
That's what I feel like when I hold this.
I would feel like that if I had a stick like that.
I had a past life regression of that. One of my past lives, I had a bit of obsession with my stick, and towards the end of my life, I ended up getting killed, and I said, I'm not being killed without my stick. And I wouldn't let go of it. I was like, old, and I was like, you're not taking this away from me. That reminded me of it for some reason.
Yeah.
I've seen myself in dream time with mine.
Yeah, me
Protecting. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite a big.
Yeah, I do magic and spells in the dream world, but it changes shape. But I know it's it. Yeah.
Yes, it's the feel of it again, isn't it?
A chap called Patrick Jasper Lee, who's from the Romany tradition. I don't know if people have come across him. He's not convinced that all these broken swords and everything are offerings to the gods, because in his tradition very much talks about we need to break the things that we've owned at the end of our lives, because it's got the spirit of us in there. And this is where we get a lot of shades and so on, where I don't know, I leave my stick here and it's not broken and there's a shade of me hanging around, sort of thing. And he's convinced that a lot of these grave offerings are to do with breaking that link, so the shades and so on.
And the river is the cleanser. The river is the great cleanser, you see. So same with crystals and things, you run water over it for long enough and it takes the energy away. And so I myself have done this recently with a stone. I've left it in the river for a whole year to cleanse it from where it came from. And there's that makes perfect sense. I've never seen it that way, never thought about it, but obviously they were clearing the energy from the objects that had all of their energy in it, so it couldn't be used.
In the Roman tradition, they burn burn everything. The tradition originally, they would burn, the caravan, everything, because it would have the spirit of their lifetime in there. They didn't want people to hang around,
Do you remember Andrew saying after they broke the rod at the Queen's funeral, after the passing, they broke the rod which ended all the contracts she held? Because so many symbolic things here too. But it means ultimately the same thing, really, from what we're saying. It's breaking that energy stream, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Someone's saying about the ash tree. Yeah, the ash tree is very special. I mean, certainly in this country, we're probably going to lose, not over 90% of our ash. I think it will come back again for other generations, but it's very sad to lose that now. But yeah, it's a very sacred tree, and often they would say that the water that's collected within the ash, is very sacred and it's very healing as well. The ash tree is a very important tree. Beautiful. So one of the sacred trees. All trees are sacred.
Yes, absolutely.
This little shrub, a bit of dirt in its name, sacred. But yeah, it's a very tree.
There's a place I do events at, and there's a guy called David, and I think he's almost 80 now, and he's had this place where it's got a sweat lodge, it's got like a little dome with a fire field, and he grows loads of plants and like native plants and stuff like that, and he's got an ancestral tree. So he's had the place for 39 years now. It's been open for people, communities to come and have fires at, and everyone who's passed away is put on the tree, and it's beautiful. He's got like all the tree decorating, everyone's names, stacked up. And I love that shit. I'd love to have my name on a tree to be remembered instead of a gravestone.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, where I work, actually, there's a woodland burial site there. And yeah, it's good to see that being used in that way again, isn't it? I mean, they're like the ultimate psychopods, really, aren't they? They're in good hands going into a tree. Brilliant.
Wow.
Right.
What a show, guys.
Yeah, brilliant show. Just want to say thanks so much to Jonathon for coming on. Been really, really great talking to you and hearing all your stories as well. Giving me goosebumps.
Lovely. It's always lovely to come and spend time with you guys. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on.
Maybe, Jonathon, we can have you come back and just tell a whole story.
Yes.
We'll just hand you the mic and you can just take us through a journey, because that was beautiful.
I'm very happy to do that.
Yeah, okay. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Dale, how can people get hold of you?
So if you'd like to get hold of me for psychic surgery sessions, go to daletobin.com. I'm also, the next psychic surgery training practitioner course I'm running is on the 5th and the 6th of June. So if you want to learn how to be a practitioner of psychic surgery and begin that special journey into the self-mastery of energy healing, drop me an email as well. And again, thank you, Jonathon. Thank you, Maty. Thank you, Laura. I love these shows. Thank you.
Yeah, they're great. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Maty, how can people get hold of you?
Go to twofeathersmedicine.com and click on my name, and you'll see what I'm all about. There's courses there, private sessions and so forth. Just hop onto the website.
Fabulous. I'm Laura Massey. I'm on Two Feathers Medicine as well, and I do my service to prayer that comes out on a Sunday about 5 o'clock in the UK. Prayer time, which is often stories, Jonathon. Which I like doing. And we will all be back on Thursday with Andrew when we're doing the coronation show, aren't we? Guys, I think it is.
Yes, we're talking about the coronation of the...
And the unseen world behind it.
Yeah, definitely.
It should be interesting. So once again, thank you, Jonathon. He's on walkwithtrees.com. And we'll have you on again and do a complete story. That was a great idea, Maty. Yeah.
So everybody remember to like and subscribe as well.
Please.
It helps us a lot if you just hit the like button.
And share. We really appreciate
and share. And
really appreciate
it. Thanks to everybody in the chat room.
Yes. Yep. Thanks for coming on, for all your questions. Sorry if we didn't get to them all. But we do really appreciate your contribution and your support. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, everyone. Space. I will not swear this time.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jonathon.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.